welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Wali Aslam and I'm an associate professor at the University of Bath here in the United Kingdom. And it is my privilege and honor to be hosting the session today, which is our third session in the MENA Social Policy Webinar Series. And the session today is called The Gender Gap in Political Participation, Evidence from the MENA. This is the third webinar in our webinar series, which is held on the last Friday. The idea is that it will bring in multiple scholars from different strands of life based at Bath or together and have a fruitful discussion on the topic of. So hopefully you can go to any search engine and you can find further details of the past and the future webinar, and you can view the recordings as well. A couple of quick housekeeping points. The series is being recorded, and if you would like your face to be blurred when you are interacting, please let us know, and we will happily. We are invited, and raise your hand if you have any questions for the question answer session later on. We will have about 30 minutes to have the session, and then we'll have a Q&A for about 25 minutes as well. Before I formally introduce the speaker, just a quick announcement for you. If you are interested in further studying this issue of the gender gap, one of our colleagues made their article on the same subject, but that is for the broader region. So you might be interested in looking at the article is written by, as I said, one of our colleagues called Hilda Coffey, with another colleague, different university called Celine Dilley. And the article is called The Gender Gap in Political Participation in Muslim Majority Countries. And it is published in the International Political Science Review back in 2014. So you might find useful for your own further research if you are interested in studying this topic in more detail. So after going through the basics, let me formally introduce our esteemed speaker today, Ali Fakih, who is an associate professor and the associate chair of the Department of Economics at the Lebanese American University. He is also a research fellow at various prestigious institutions and think tanks, such as the Global Labour Organization. He received his PhD from HEC Montreal in 2011 in the field of economics. His research interests focus on labor economics, development economics, political transformations, and of course, MENA economics as well. And he is very widely published as a prestigious scholar. And some of the journals where his publications have appeared include the Journal of Industrial Relations, as well as the Journal of Agricultural Economics. So, as I said, we are looking forward to hopefully this productive presentation. And I will pass it on to Ali now to deliver his talk for, as I said, for about 30 minutes, and then we'll come back for any question answer session. So thank you very much, Ali, for joining us, and over to you, and we are keenly looking forward to your talk.
Thank you, Wali. Thank you so much for your word. First, I would like to really thank MENA Network, Rana, Olivia, and the rest of team for this opportunity to present my work and to reflect on the MENA economies, especially during this difficult time. With no further delay, what we are doing in this paper, next please, Olivia. So basically, this is a joint work with Yara Stayman from Institute of Global Prosperity at UCL. The paper is really simple, but trying to bring a new evidence on the gender difference in political participation across the MENA countries. It's a comprehensive, using comprehensive data set. We differentiate between two types of political participation, the classical institutional setting, beside non-institutional settings that gain popularity over the last few decades. And we try to evaluate whether the gender gap in both forms of participation is derived from demographic resources, socioeconomic resources, or other variables like attitudinal controls, attitudinal variables, besides to see if political participation affect differently men and women in the MENA region. So basically, the motivation is a pretty classic for this paper, with the eruption of the Arab Spring that promoted a revaluation of every aspect of economies, social contracts, and politics in the Arab world. And basically, the discourse on gender and politics has gained rising attention, with efforts to examine what happened over the last years and before the Arab Spring, and to provide some comparative analysis. In our context is about political participation. So gender discrepancies is very common observation across MENA countries, and actually can be linked to critical problems in across democracy sphere, and usually it is explained by, or can be or possible explanation if political participation is interesting, a democratic good that should be in place. Patterns of unequal participation are a threat to democracy. So these are some common arguments emerged and commonly known in different existing studies. So, and we looking into some figures across the MENA region. So particularly when looking into global gender gap index, we are observing that the average is around 61%. So this is the lowest figure when it's compared to all economic regions and all other regions. So despite the improvement at different levels into educational attainment, access to education for females over the last few decades, and despite we have an improvement by around 0.5% in this index, the MENA region is still lagging behind all other regions. And when looking into the proportion of parliamentary seats held by women in the MENA region, they represent around 19%. We witnessed an improvement over, again, the last decades, but still not enough to enhance or to observe an engagement of females in the MENA region. So next, please. So basically, what we would like to do in this paper is to go beyond the classical institutional we control for this type of political participation. And actually, they reflect a formal context of membership in political parties, participation in election, working on campaigns. You observe a declining trend in institutional engagement over last decades. On the other hand, we have an increase in other types of political participation, which are broader, reflecting the citizen initiative approach, participate in NGOs, informal meetings, strikes, boycotts, and so on, that gain popularity, and new evidence are in place and leading to some new results. So again, the other dimension or other contribution, extending studies or reflecting or generalizing the results or evidence from developed economies to developing economies or countries, including MENA countries, is not a good idea and may have leading to some biased observations. So political participation may take different forms in fragile states and democracies that are not applicable to these states if you want to do a dimension from existing studies. So studying the MENA region allows us to assess whether the results and assumptions based on developed countries hold or less or you observed new patterns. Okay, so next please. In terms of definition of political participation, so we go beyond the and we try to avoid having a broader definition of political participation to avoid the theory of everything that can be adopted. So we give specific definitions that will be clarified shortly in the data section. So they include or variables used in analytical part, actions carried out by, or they try to reflect actions carried out by citizens in an attempt to influence political decision making. They exclude involuntary participation, political attitudes, school club, family engagement, in order to reflect on non-institutional forms of political participation. And basically, given the civic engagement and political participation and evaluating such inequality is interest and can be explain in a way or another the Arab Spring movements, where it was initiated by NGOs and informal participations in demonstrations, strike during that period that started in 2011. So to the best of our knowledge, this is a comprehensive analysis that we do in the paper, and can answer some questions related to the political transformations that shaped the Arab region starting 2011. Next, please. So basically, we refer to political participation as actions conducted by citizens in an attempt to impact decision-making, excluding different forms like I mentioned previously. And we differentiate between institutional participation and non-institutional participation. So institutional forms, they are long-established actions, typically includes voting, party membership, and so on. Non-institutional participation try to capture these non-conventional forms of participation. We focus particularly on collective activism, such as protest, demonstrations, occupying building, like we witnessed in Lebanon, starting following the 2019 uprising or October 17 revolution. It didn't materialize yet, or it didn't lead yet to a fruitful outcome, but this is a sort of non-institutional political participation. Private activism also is a variable that we include, signing petitions, joining boycotts, internet political comments, and so on. So these variables will be taken into account in our participation, in our analysis, and to reflect on political participation. Next, please. So if we provide a short survey of existing studies or literature review on gender differences in political participation forms, so gender differences in participation may be rooted in divergent preferences, where they are reflecting the profile of individual, or it may be influenced by demographic and attitudinal characteristics, or if you want, socioeconomic resources. So political participation was highlighted to be highly connected to resource endowments, different access to education, different types of endowments. So results from developed economies or countries show that male are more likely to participate in resource-dependent activities, while women tend to specialize in private forms. And this is there's an interesting observation in MENA economies, where recently labor market activities or job creation were observed more at private sector that absorbed more females than public sector. So this is a important structural transformations in many economist countries across the last decades that started basically following the 2011, and good observation is from Tunisia. However, looking into results from new democracies, consistent gender gap across all forms of participation. So institutional participation is a conventional form, safest arena of participation, witnessed less gap. Okay, so next, please. This leads us to develop our first hypothesis. We assume that the institutional participation in a gender gap favors men more and is less pronounced than non-institutional gap, based on this observation or this lesson from existing studies. Second hypothesis, the non-institutional participation gender gap favor men, but is less pronounced for private activism. Next, please. So we control for a bunch of characteristics. First, a group of characteristics, they are defined as socioeconomic characteristics, such as education, age, basic socioeconomic characteristics, income, to reflect on endowment resources. So higher levels of participation as resource endowment increase the participation rate. Income and control over income, education attainment, employment status. So they affect potential resources, time, skills available for participation. So these are factors that will affect the perception of individuals and decision of the individual to participate in or will affect political participation of an individual. Marriage and obligations toward children. So limited income, last time availability were highlighted to affect also the participation, age, associational involvement. So all these factors were highlighted to be important characteristics that shape the decision to participate or not to participate. All right. So next, please. Based on this observation, so we developed our third hypothesis with increasing socioeconomic resources, both men and women will participate more politically. This effect is stronger for men than for women. So this is a third hypothesis we try to test in our application. Next, please. Political attitudes, this is the second set of characteristics that we try to control for and to see its impact on political participation. Individual politically held beliefs or perception are strong indicator for political engagement. So this is very relevant to the Arab Spring and political transformations, where it is very common observation in Egypt, where perception of individual trust in institutions, trust in different political setting played a role in the mind of people, particularly for youth. So in our recent published paper in the covering the case of Egypt, we observed these variables to play important role in initiating the Arab Spring, participation and demonstration. So those who regard politics as more interesting and important participate more. Positive correlation between political attitudes of individual and participation in the Arab world, also highlighted in existing studies. Massive protest, demonstration, client list, party relationship also are implementing symptoms of high democratic deficit, and so on. So based on these arguments, we developed our next hypothesis. Next, please. In order to test the role or to examine the impact of such variables on our political participation outcome variables, as we argue, or we note that as levels of political trust, interest, importance, and democratic deficit increase, political participation tends to increase. So this effect is stronger among men. All right. So these are our hypotheses that we would like to test empirically using data covering around 12 MENA countries. Next, please. So moving now into the empirical application, we rely on world value surveys, Wave 6, 2010, 2014, to focus after the following the period of Arab Spring in order to extract some fresh evidence related to Arab Spring. Sample size, so we include the following countries: Algeria, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Libya, Morocco, Tunisia, Palestine, and Yemen. So our sample size is large enough, around 13,000 observation, split it almost in a similar way between males and females, with around 48% of our sampled individuals are males. Next, please. So what we are doing, we would like to examine the role of socioeconomic basic characteristics or resource endowment characteristics, plus attitudinal characteristics on some outcome variables. So, previous slide, please, the previous one. So yes, this one, yes. Dependent variables, so these are outcome variables. We use 3 variables. The conventional institutional participation, it is constructed from 2 variables: party membership, electoral behavior. They are ordinal variables ranging between 0 to 2. 0 don't belong to active membership. Second variable, never participation, to always. Second dependent variable is private activism, which is a sort of non-institutional participation. Also, it is constructed from 2 variables: petitions and boycotts. So both, they are ordinal variables ranging between 0 and 2. So 0 would never to have done. I signed petitions. Boycott would never to have done boycotts, and so on. Second form of non-institutional participation, collective activism, where also we construct this variable from 2 ordinal variables: participation in demonstrations, strikes, ranging between 0 to 2. So these are our outcome variables that we would like to explain their variability in function of the following variables. Next, please. So we control for socioeconomic characteristics: male, educational attainment, marital status. So we have their definition here. Some of them, they are binary variables. Some of them, they are continuous, like age. Political attitudes, trust in political system, political trust index, political interest, if you have interest or develop an interest in political participation, importance of politics, democracy deficit. It's interesting, it ranges between -9 and 9. Full deficit in democracy was -9, +9 is the highest. I mean, no, sorry, the opposite, -9, no deficit, to maximum 9 with largest deficit. All right, so these are our variables that we will use as drivers for our political participation. So next, please. So the following table reports the average of our variables. So dependent variables, we are observing for male and females. Basically, they show significant gender difference when we are comparing the averages between the 2. And it is significant where the p-value is small, 0.0, and the 3 forms of political participation. Looking into some averages, basically here we are observing that around 34.6% of individuals, they have secondary education or attending secondary education. The reference group or basic groups that we compare with, no education, versus primary, secondary, university. 60% of our sample of individuals, they are married. 3% they are separated compared to never married, which is a reference group. 66% they are married. A number of children is around 2. The average of participants in the survey is around 38. And some averages, and they are statistically significant between the two, except number of children, income, marital status, primary education. So there are some observations. So this table try to establish the mean values between male and female. So next, please. Looking into regression results. So the key variable is gender variable, female. So in this regression table, we use ordered logit model, where our dependent variables are institutional participation in model 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. Next 3 columns will replicate the first 3. However, they will use as outcome variable private participation. Also, next column will will replicate institutional participation, but with collective activism. So looking, and we present the odds ratio. So these parameters are the odds ratio, and figures between parentheses, they are standard error. Looking into the key variables, so we have a lot of results here. Looking into the key variable, female variable, we are observing a consistent results where there is the results establish a gender gap in different types of political participation is less pronounced in private activism and collective activism compared to institutional participation forms. So it's negative across different columns. So in model 1, even if you don't take into account any variable, any socioeconomic variable, or next please, Olivia. So, and you don't control, next, sorry, next one. Also, you don't control to any sort of political attitudes. You are observing a gap or gender gap or gender differential in political participation. So previous 2 slides, please, if you can go back to the main table. So moving across models from the simple to full model, we are observing a consistent results. So there is a negative correlation between gender and political participation, highlighting the existing of gender gap in this political participation. So looking into different characteristics, most of them, they are significant. They are the controls, our control variables. So we can interpret very quickly some of them. So having a university education, as the level of education increases, you will participate more. So as the odds ratio exceeds 1, but highlighting a positive correlation between educational attainment and political participation. Being married will lead you to participate more in institutional participation. However, you will participate less in private activism and will participate even less in collective activism. So the key point here is that moving across models for the key variable will lead to a reduction in participation. Gender gap is less pronounced. Next, please. So, so some observation also, as age increases, participation in non-institutional activities decreases. Results for marriage. With marriage and an increased number of children, citizens may opt for more stability in their domestic and social lives. Next, please. Looking now in the full model. So in model 1.3, 1.2, 2.2, and 3.2. We don't include political attitudes. In the full model, we control for political trust and the different variables here. And we are observing a higher political trust as the indicator that you trust more in political setting increases, you will participate more. So it's consistent for institutional participation. It is not significant, will not matter when you move into private activism, the first one, political trust, while the rest will lead you to participate more, similar in collective activism. Overall, political attitudes matter for political participation. As a result, most of variables are significant and statistically important for our outcome variables. Next, please. Now we took the full model in 1.3, 2.3, 3.3, and we split it. We run it by gender. All right. So male, female, and so on. So basically, you are observing that there is no statistical difference in primary education regarding institutional participation, while it is weakly significant when it comes to secondary education. So male will participate more, but at a weak level, while at university education, it will increase substantially. So male will participate more, while for female, they participate less, but the result is not significant. Moving into private activism and collective activism. So basically, and interestingly, if we look into the odds ratio here, for university education, even for secondary education, male and females will participate more if we split the sample by gender. So this is a different model here, different regression model. We run a technique, an econometric model called sure regression, where the equations we run in each column are correlated. So we have some correlation here. So results by gender, we rely on different models that will allow to get some correlation across different types of participation. So it means if we have some unobservable factors that may push individuals to participate more, females will be correlated with these factors for females in this model. So basically, this is an interesting observation regarding education, and a recent evidence from the MENA region. It was highlighted in different studies on migration that usually particularly use university education and education in general as a way to exit the system and to migrate, right? So this may be also reflecting here. So they participate more, they are educated, they want to change, they participate more, they are not able to have a real change, they want to leave. So they, because in different studies, as the level of education increases, the probability or the willingness to migrate increases. And in two papers we did, one in Lebanon, one on the MENA region, we get consistent results. Next, please. So workforce participation is translated also in political engagement through resources, and also it shapes the importance of participation in the labor market and some correlation between labor market participation and political participation. Next, please. Also regarding different types of political attitudes, here we are observing some patterns. For political trust, the likelihood will increase for male and female to participate in institutional participation. As your interest in politics and different political and you have higher interest, this will lead to increase your participation in different types of political participation. So here, most of results, they are significant and they are in line with the main results highlighted in the first table or in the main table. Next, please.
Hi, Ali, could you probably wrap up in maybe 2 more minutes? Is that possible? Just
yeah,
2 minutes.
Exactly. So if you can skip this part. Yeah, so here we run the same model again by gender, by regime type, by country. So we replicate the full model in the main results in order to do some robustness check when decomposing countries by regime type. So we have full democracy, hybrid regimes, etc. So we decided to have high authoritarian regime, low authoritarian regime, and hybrid. So basically, when looking into the key variable, let us focus on the first one, on the key variable. We are observing a gender gap in authoritarian, high authoritarian, even though it is weak. So females will participate less. Low authoritarian will participate also less, but it is more important. While in hybrid regimes, there is no statistical difference between males and females. However, and interestingly, looking into private activism and collective activism, you are observing a consistent result. Females will participate less, regardless the type of political regime. So this is a consistent observations or the most robust one. So let me skip socioeconomic controls and to move next. Finally, we run the model by country. Next, Olivia. And next, please. Yeah, so here, this table summarizes, so we have the same socioeconomic controls, but we present only the gender variable. You are observing some mixed result across countries, but for instance, in Algeria, females will participate more in institutional settings. However, they will have less participation in private and collective settings, right? For instance, in Iraq and Palestine, they have same results, but they will be participating less. Overall, the results indicate a lower participation and the existence of gender gap between two genders. Next, please. So finally, implications. What we did in this paper is simply we try to provide additional evidence on political participation from this highly conflicted region in the world. And we are observing that gender gap is observed across the different scenarios and different models we run. And there is a clear cut evidence that females are participating less in the political sphere. So some implications we highlight besides many other implications in our paper. So political decision-making should be a reflection of all participation forms and not to focus on voting in election, political participation, and this attract particularly youth and may lead to a real change across the Arab region. Policies and policy design need to promote the participation of women in the labor market in order to enhance their economic empowerment, and thus they will lead to more participation in political sphere. And finally, gender-sensitive reforms must start by targeting the implicit interconnected constraints that shape women out of politics, some domestic burdens, access to good jobs. For example, the future of job highlighted by international organizations is a critical for developing economies, particularly for MENA regions, because the type of jobs, the system created in the MENA region they don't provide enough job security for marginalized groups, including youth and females. In addition, there are severe cultural barriers that still shaping the Arab world and financing constraints. So these are some implications. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.
Thank you. I am sure that this thought-provoking presentation will invite a number of questions. So shall we open the floor to the audience? Please do introduce yourselves when you ask the question. And if possible, we encourage you to have your camera on so that we can see you. So Janan, do you want to go first?
Yes, thank you very much. Just one sec. Yeah, thank you very much, Ali. It was really very informative, a presentation. Thank you very much to talking about this painful subject. I have a very quick question and some comments. Private activism, what exactly means? That's my question. And whether or not you have used the literature about the new civil society. There is some literature about the new civil society, apart from NGOs and political parties. So I wonder if you raised or you touched upon this literature. And for political gap, is it like it goes one line or does it go like up and down? Now we are living in this decade, from the beginning of decade till the end of the decade. We have uprising and revolutions, and we saw women participation in different ways. For example, we know in Sudan, 60% of women were in the streets. Women in Iraq, they participated in a massive way in the uprising. Women in Lebanon, again. So in these demonstrations and uprising and revolutions, maybe women, manifest their demands, their rule, different than regular times. And the other point is about, maybe you called it private activism, and you classify it like institutional and private. In private, I guess you mean different ways of women participation. Even when they wanted to change the social norms, would that be considered as a political action? Because I believe politics means changing the existing order or the social norms. Do you see this like kind of private activism, this kind of protest, maybe in the house or
Thank you, Janan.
in the workplace?
Thank you. Sure. Thank you. We were running short on time, so and other questions as well.
Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
In the audience, is there any? Because I think it's good if we can take one more and then we can go to the speaker. Any other questions in the audience?
So I didn't know how to raise the hand.
Sure, yeah. Just quickly, if you can just introduce yourself so that we know.
Yes. So I'm Ali Hamoudi. I'm a student PhD student at University College of Dublin, and I'm studying civil society organizations in Iraq. My question really is just to understand better the results that you came to. It seems that so we see that even when you control for all these different variables, socio-political as well as domestic issues, so we would think that women would be less participating because they're married or because they have children, and you control it for all of this, and yet we still see that women are participating less. And so, I mean, this is your conclusions, the implications that we should offer more child support, these types of things. But even when you control, the problem is still there. So what is your interpretation of what's going on? Why is this gap occurring even when we control for these various variables?
Thank you. Ali, could you just take a couple of minutes for this, because we might have others as well.
Yeah. So thank you, Janan, for your questions. I totally agree. It's very painful topic, because women are still suffering at different levels in the MENA region. So regarding literature review, it's a good point. So we didn't cover this part of literature review, and this is a relevant question because we revised recently our paper, and it's, I think we shall include some arguments from this type of literature. So thank you. Regarding private activism, so basically it is defined as the frequency of individuals or frequency of respondent participation in petitions and boycotts regarding private activism. So if you are frequently participating, you will be giving a code, let's say, would never, I didn't, might do, or I'm always participating in this type of activity. So we consider them a private because it is motivated by some self-perception. Yeah. So this is a definition of private activism, and basically we take the two variables and we construct this indicator, and we name it a private activism. So this is regarding this variable, and regarding up and down. So really, it's an important question, and we know women are really doing a great job at different levels when they participate in the labor market in the MENA region. And a study we did on what affect firm performance, you observe that when you have females participating in the ownership or in upper administration, the performance increases in the MENA region. But still struggling in workplaces and political participation due to the system itself. The system itself needs reforms. It's hard really to answer this question because they participated in demonstrations. They did, like you said, across different countries. Even in Lebanon, most of participants in demonstrations in 2019 were females. But still, there are some barriers in the system that doesn't allow females to participate more. And I think this is common across the MENA region. Is it because dominated by males, or is it the nature of the society? For example, soon we will have election in Lebanon next year. They will still debating, should we give a quota for females or no? Because we have very, very few seats for females or representative females in the parliament. So this is really critical, and this is across the society. I think it is related to the nature of society, and you need a shock in order to make a difference. So this will lead me to Ali question. So you do, you change your model, you add variables, and still consistent that females participate less. So it is a common question also in female participation in the labor market. When you observe why females and why female employment is still very low across MENA countries, and it is the lowest, similar to political participation. This leads me to reflect again on the system that needs reform. Different laws, regulations that needs really a work. And a recent work we did to review different regulations, policies, you observe a gap in the policies itself. So we did this exercise, we did a mapping analysis in Lebanon. When you analyze all the existing laws, circulars, and any law or suggested laws, you observe some gaps. So I think this is a challenge here you need a shock in reforming the existing regulations and laws that will allow females explicitly to participate more. Yeah, I hope I answered your questions.
Sure. Let's see if any of the other participants have any questions, because I have one, but let's see if I want to. Olivia, any chance we could go to the third slide, because there is something I want to point out there to ask my question, and I can stop my question at any minute if there is somebody in the audience who wants to ask something, because the audience comes first. I think it was third or the fourth slide. Yeah, if you keep going back, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, exactly. So the one before this. This one. Yes, Ali, I was struggling. So when you say political participation includes actions carried out by citizens in an attempt to influence political decision making, which is fine. But then how does it exclude political attitudes? Because surely if an action is carried out by a citizen in an attempt to influence political decision making, they will have a political attitude, no? Ali?
Yeah, so basically this in order to reflect a bidirectional relationship between political participation and the political attitude you add to examine your outcome variable. So we are trying to examine changes in political, what drive political participation. So it includes a sort of political participation and political, like mentioned here, maybe the terminology is not too appropriate, but because we control for political attitude, but I mean political participation that should be excluded to explain political participation, if you get my point. So to avoid a bidirectional relationship between what we are trying to use as explanatory variables and what we want to use as outcome variables. All right. So maybe here it's not the good statement or terminologies we use, but it's not per se we are excluding the political attitudes we mentioned in our tables.
Okay. Well, let's park that for a minute. The question.
I agree with you. So here it's misleading. I want to check the terminology we use in this section in literature review.
Okay, so there's a question from Amal Karaki, who is asking, how much weight do you allocate to the impact of religion on women's participation? And Sylvia is asking if the paper is available somewhere online.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we didn't control for religious variables. So this is important. In a different paper, basically, it's under review, I hope. So we examine the role of religion to examine the political trend and participation in Arab Spring. So there we focus, but I agree it's an important driver for political participation, and it shaped the life of individuals here, because people are motivated by, in many countries, this is a fact. I don't want to go into this type of debate or discussion, but many individuals are or can take or base their decision on religion. And this is a part of different cultural barriers that shape the MENA region. So in our paper, we didn't include, we don't want to go into this type of direction. We want to actually avoid this type of discussion in our paper. The second question, yes, the paper is not available online. It is under revision in a journal, but I can share with you if anyone would like to have a copy.
They can get in touch.
Definitely, exactly.
Okay, we have 1 minute, so you will have 30 seconds to answer this question, which is, what significant, again from Amal, what significant policy action is needed to rectify the situation in the short term?
Yeah, so policy action you need, and for me, if you want to ask me, because sometimes some policy implications, some observations from a research paper, especially we do empirical, we use data, statistics, and so on, may be hard to materialize if you don't have a shock, a real, a political will in the system. So looking into the case of Lebanon, even in Egypt, it required a shock. You wanted to have a shock. And it's a different question if really you achieve some level of democracy, but you need some a shock in the system in order to get a reform, right? So we know you want to engage females more in labor market activities and political participation. Why you don't do it?
Sure.
Because there is no political will, basically. So this is
sure. We'll have to wrap it up now because people are already leaving. But thank you very much for the presentation and for answering all the questions. I encourage all the participants, if they can, please join us again for the next event, which is on the 24th of November 2021 at the same time. And the title is Women and Peace, State Legitimacy and Service Delivery, Case Studies from Iraq and Sri Lanka. And that is delivered by Dr. Zainab Kaya and Dr. Claire McLaughlin from the Universities of Sheffield and Birmingham. So please join us if you can. But thank you so much to everybody and especially to our speaker, and look forward to seeing you again in the near future.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for attending and for your interesting questions. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care.